What if your biggest obstacle isn't laziness? What if it isn't lack of talent, lack of money, or lack of opportunity? What if the real trap is something far more subtle? Your imagination, not creativity, not vision, escapism. There's a difference. Tyler was 20 years old and had one rare ability. He could build entire futures in his head in seconds. In his imagination, he had already released an album, launched a startup, delivered speeches to thousands, and given interviews about his success. In real life, he couldn't finish a single project. He would start strong, excited, inspired, focused. 3 weeks later, he was gone. Not physically, mentally. If you're honest, you might recognize this pattern. You think about the life you want. You visualize the result. You imagine the applause, the transformation, the moment everything finally works out. And in that fantasy, it already feels good. So good that reality starts to feel unnecessary. This isn't harmless daydreaming. It's a silent addiction. In 2010, 2 Harvard researchers, Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, conducted a study that revealed something uncomfortable. They built an app that randomly interrupted people during the day and asked 3 simple questions. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? How do you feel? The result was startling. People were not mentally present nearly half the time, about 47% of their waking hours. Almost half their life was spent elsewhere in their heads. And here's the critical detail. When their minds wandered, they reported being less happy. Regardless of whether they were thinking about something pleasant or unpleasant. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind, but modern culture doesn't frame it that way. We celebrate imagination. We romanticize living in your head. We call it depth, creativity, vision. And sometimes it is. But sometimes it's avoidance. Tyler grew up in Portland, Oregon. Middle-class family, no dramatic trauma, no tragic backstory, just a quiet habit that grew stronger every year. In school, teachers would say he had potential. He wrote music in his notebooks instead of solving math problems. He imagined interviews while standing in grocery store lines. During family dinners, he was mentally performing on stage. As a teenager, it was charming. As an adult, it was paralyzing. By 20, he had dropped out of 3 college programs. He had launched 2 music projects, a YouTube channel, and a design brand. None survived more than 3 months. It wasn't lack of ability. The work he produced was impressive. The problem emerged when the work stopped being exciting and started being difficult. The moment repetition appeared. The moment doubt appeared. The moment boredom appeared. That's when his mind escaped. He would sit down to work and suddenly imagine the finished version, the final product, the praise, the outcome. In his imagination, there was no rejection, no slow progress, no awkward drafts, only success. And here's the dangerous part. His brain rewarded him for it. Neuroscience explains this clearly. When you vividly imagine a positive outcome, your dopamine system activates in a way that closely resembles actual achievement. Your brain cannot fully distinguish between deeply imagined success and real success. So Tyler felt progress without making any. Why struggle through the messy middle when fantasy delivers the emotional reward instantly? This is not a character flaw, it's reinforcement. The more he fantasized, the less motivated he became to act. The more he imagined applause, the less he could tolerate slunts. Over time, it got worse. In conversations, his mind drifted mid-sentence. Friends complained he wasn't present. Relationships cooled. Jobs didn't last. His employers described him the same way: talented but unfocused, creative but unreliable. One afternoon, after being let go for lack of commitment, Tyler sat alone in his room staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, he didn't escape into fantasy. He saw it. He wasn't just distracted, he was deserting his own life. That realization carried weight because it meant the problem wasn't external. It wasn't opportunity. It wasn't bad luck. It was his relationship with the present moment. And that's when he decided to seek help. He described his issue as difficulty focusing, but deep down, he knew it was something else. It was the habit of mentally living in a version of life that required no effort. In the next part, you'll meet the psychologist who introduced him to a centuries-old philosophy that dismantled this pattern, and you'll see how ancient Zen principles align directly with modern neuroscience to rebuild attention and break the addiction to imagined success. Tyler didn't expect anything unusual from therapy. He had tried productivity systems before, time blocking, dopamine detoxes, motivation videos. None lasted. But Dr. Kakashi was different. The office was quiet. No walls covered in credentials, just a single framed sentence. The present moment is the only place where life actually happens. Kakashi didn't start with a questionnaire. He asked one question. "Where are you right now?" Tyler looked around. "Here, in your office." Kakashi shook his head gently. "I mean your mind." And Tyler felt it instantly. He wasn't fully there. He was already imagining how he would later describe this therapy session to a friend. Rehearsing the story, editing the narrative, he was in the future, again. Kakashi nodded as if this was expected. "Good, we start here." Over the next weeks, Kakashi introduced him to a concept rooted in Zen and Japanese martial traditions. Mushin. It translates loosely as no mind, not the absence of thought, the absence of attachment to thought. Mushin is the state in which thoughts arise, but you don't chase them. They pass through without pulling you away. Tyler resisted at first. "That sounds impossible. The mind never stops thinking." "It doesn't need to stop," Kakashi replied. "It needs to stop dragging you." The problem wasn't that Tyler imagined things. It was that he got absorbed in them. There was no separation between awareness and fantasy. When a thought appeared, he followed it automatically. Mushin trains the space between thought and identification. Notice. Return, notice, return. That's it. No force, no suppression, no anger, just returning. But Kakashi didn't stop there. He introduced a second concept, zanshin. It translates as remaining mind or sustained awareness. In martial arts, zanshin is the state of alert presence that continues even after an action is completed. You strike, and you remain aware. You finish, and you remain grounded. You do not mentally jump to celebration or regret. You stay. Kakashi explained it simply. You start a task, and within seconds you are imagining the finished result. You abandon the action before it is done. Tyler nodded. That's the opposite of zanshin. Zanshin trains endurance of presence, not intensity, not excitement, sustained attention without escape. Weeks later, Kakashi introduced a third principle, Ichigo Ichie, a Japanese tea philosophy meaning one time, one meeting. Every moment is unrepeatable. This sip of tea, this sentence, this breath, it will never exist again in exactly the same way. When you deeply understand that, presence stops being discipline. It becomes reverence. Tyler held the warm cup of tea in his hands during one session. For once, he wasn't imagining being interviewed about personal growth. He was just sitting there, and something unfamiliar happened. Silence didn't feel empty. It felt real. Kakashi explained the psychological side of what was happening. The brain contains networks responsible for task-focused attention, and others responsible for what neuroscientists call the default mode network. the system active during mind-wandering and self-referential thought. When the default mode becomes dominant and unchecked, it pulls you into constant mental time travel. Past, future, fantasy, regret. When you repeatedly return to the present, you strengthen the neural circuits responsible for focused attention. This is not spiritual poetry, it's neuroplasticity. Studies in mindfulness training show measurable structural changes in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with regulation, awareness, and intentional behavior. You are literally reshaping your brain, but Kakashi warned Tyler about something important. Not all daydreaming is harmful. There is a difference between deliberate reflection and compulsive escape. Creative insight often arises during relaxed mental states. The problem isn't imagination, it's lack of control. If you cannot choose when to enter fantasy and when to leave it, you are not imagining, you are avoiding. That distinction changed everything. Tyler realized he had never chosen his mental state. He had drifted into it, automatically, without permission. Kakashi introduced one final word, kokoro. There is no perfect English translation. It refers to the integrated unity of heart, mind, and spirit. When these are aligned, there is no fragmentation. When they are fragmented, the mind escapes because something feels incomplete. Compulsive daydreaming, Kakashi suggested, is often a symptom of internal fragmentation. Your mind here, your body elsewhere, your intentions scattered. Rebuilding kokoro means aligning action and awareness. Doing what you are doing, fully, without splitting into imagined versions of yourself. At first, Tyler struggled. He would sit down to work and within seconds his mind drifted. But instead of criticizing himself, he practiced one skill. Return. No anger, no self-judgment. Return. It was boring, repetitive, unimpressive, but slowly the gap between distractions widened. 5 seconds of focus became 10, 10 became 30, 30 became a minute. He wasn't becoming superhuman. He was becoming present. And that shift would change everything. In the final part, you'll see the turning point. The moment Tyler completed something real for the first time, and the critical difference between destructive fantasy and controlled imagination. 3 months into working with Dr. Kakashi, nothing dramatic had happened. Tyler wasn't famous, he hadn't launched a startup, he wasn't suddenly disciplined in every area of life. But something subtle had shifted. He was catching himself. That was new. One evening, he sat down to work on a design project. Normally, this was the point where the cycle would begin. He would sketch for a few minutes, then drift into imagining the finished product. The praise, the recognition, the sense of arrival. This time, the familiar pull started. His mind began constructing the future, but instead of getting absorbed, he noticed it. No frustration, no guilt, just awareness. And he returned. Back to the screen, back to the unfinished line in front of him, back to the only place where progress was possible. He didn't hold focus for long, maybe 20 seconds. Then the mind wandered again. And again he returned. That became the practice, not perfection. Return, not suppression, return. He wasn't fighting imagination. He was refusing to live inside it. For the first time in years, a project moved past the 2-week mark. Then 3 weeks, then a month. It wasn't exciting. There were no fireworks. It was repetitive, sometimes frustrating, often boring, but it was real. One night around 11, Tyler leaned back in his chair and looked at the screen. The project was finished, not imagined, not rehearsed, not fantasized, built. He didn't jump into future interviews in his mind. He didn't imagine applause. He just sat there, present. And something unexpected surfaced. Pride. Not the inflated pride of fantasy, quiet pride. The kind that comes from effort. That moment changed his relationship with imagination forever, because he discovered something critical. Reality has texture. It has resistance. It has weight. Fantasy feels smooth, but it's hollow. Reality feels hard, but it's solid. There's an important distinction researchers have identified between two types of mind wandering. Maladaptive daydreaming is compulsive and escapist. It functions to avoid discomfort. It rewards you emotionally without requiring action. Productive imagination, on the other hand, is intentional and brief. It supports creativity and insight, and then returns to execution. The difference is control. If you cannot choose when to imagine and when to stop, imagination controls you. If you can enter and exit deliberately, imagination becomes a tool. Tyler didn't eliminate daydreaming from his life. He learned to manage it. He would allow himself to visualize outcomes deliberately for a few minutes. Then he would return to the process. The key word was choice. Before, fantasy was automatic. Now, presence was intentional. Over the next year, he completed 3 full projects. Not viral successes, not overnight breakthroughs, but finished work. And something even more surprising happened. His real life became more interesting than his fantasies. Because reality evolves. Fantasy repeats. Fantasy is static perfection. Reality improves through iteration. In fantasy, he was always at the peak. In real life, he was climbing. And climbing feels different. It builds strength. There's something no one tells you about escapism. It shrinks your tolerance for effort. The more you rehearse perfect futures, the less patience you have for imperfect beginnings. But presence reverses that. When you train Mushin, noticing thoughts without being consumed, you weaken the grip of mental time travel. When you practice Zanshin, sustained attention, you strengthen endurance. When you embrace Ichigo-ichi, the uniqueness of each moment, you start respecting now instead of abandoning it. And when Kokoro aligns, heart, mind, and action unified, there's less need to escape, because there's nothing you're avoiding anymore. Tyler never became the exaggerated version of success he once imagined at 20. He didn't end up on giant stages.